This is episode 0007 of the Digital Ascent podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about first that Meta fired 11,000 of its employees recently. And then we're going to be talking about vulnerability management. We'll explain what it is, what are some of the challenges behind it, and then, what are some of the war stories that, some of our contributors have endured dealing with vulnerability management. With us today, we have me, Matt. We have Brent, Sean, and Jordy, and we also have a guest contributor, Chris, that will be, bringing his expertise to the table. That all being said, let's go ahead and get started talking about Meta. So you may have heard of the metaverse. It's, Mark Zuckerberg's new virtual reality next future for the internet that he's putting together and investing a bunch of money in. Recently, he said that, maybe he did make some sort of mistakes here and that he needs to let go of 11,000 of his employees because it's not working out. What do you guys think about this? Any opinions about the massive layoffs?
Yeah, it doesn't bode well, in my opinion. If you're laying off 11,000 people, curious how you still have faith in that.
This may be like some weird conspiracy theory territory here, all right, but I'm gonna rip the Band-Aid off and I'm gonna just throw it out there, right? So obviously we're well aware that like Mark Zuckerberg is like he's trying to lead, he's trying to lead us into this realm of like, VR and embracing, virtual reality. And I think this new device they just dropped is more of the augmented reality, but the goal is still the same. How can we make this more mainstream? And I heard something crazy, like he was planning to have spent like, I don't know, I can't remember, like billions of dollars on VR and the metaverse just this year alone.
$15 billion on its so-called metaverse project.
I just want $1 million. I just want $1 million. That's it.
Wait, look, and I feel like a feeling of relief that I wasn't wrong, like that I wasn't pulled that out of anywhere, and I also feel very sad that I was even remotely close. But all this to say, you guys are tracking, like, I'm just gonna like shoot straight towards it, but you guys are tracking, Apple made a lot of changes to like their privacy, like on their devices, either last year, maybe it was early this year. And when that happened and they flipped that switch, right, like whatever, I'm not sure what it was specifically, but they kind of locked like apps' abilities, their ability to kind of to gather the information they were, you know what I mean, without some kind of permission. Absolutely, yes. And so when Apple made these changes to the security and the privacy on their devices and all that stuff, Facebook they started losing a lot of money, right? Facebook is in the business of people. They're in the business of data, right? So this theory that I heard, I have these words, I can't remember. It's real kind of weird, but the idea is that like Zuckerberg is getting into VR because it's another avenue of like people data. You know what I mean? There's, I'm kind of like losing the words to it, but this is another avenue into the privacy and the information that he can't have because of the way that these big tech companies are going with trying to put privacy back into, the consumer's kind of court, if that makes sense. So for Zuckerberg, this is another in. You know what I mean? They're losing money regardless of what he's spending it on because he doesn't have people's information anymore or as much. It's not the same. They don't have the same loopholes that like Google has. So I think this is him laying these people off. I mean, it's just another way to kind of keep the ship afloat. You know what I mean? Let's get rid of these people. Let's patch some financial holes around the, like, I'm not a money guy. I'm not a business guy, but you can read and it seems kind of fishy. Why does Mark Zuckerberg care about VR? He doesn't care about the metaverse, right? That's not.
Well, he kind of does. So what's interesting with Facebook is like you said, and you kind of nailed it right on the head. They're a data company. They created the software that got a bunch of information. They sell ads. That's how they make their money. They're an ad sales company. And so what Apple did was they added Apple added a feature that says it literally goes, I'll ask this app or do not allow this app to track, essentially, and that takes all the power out of their hands. And so what he's doing is he's found that VR, and he truly believes that that's going to be the next jump. That's what we're doing next. And rather than having his hand tied by companies like Apple and Google, he wants to be the platform. He's saying he's putting all his eggs into the basket and saying that if the metaverse takes off, if Facebook owns the platform that all these other things are on, they can't cut us out like they're doing with that. They've tried to make hardware. They went into the smartphone market. It died. They went into the VR market, and they've made one of the most successful VR headsets for consumers at a low rate. And they did that, and then he's dumping a bunch of money. He just wants to be the Google or the Apple of what everybody else is in. So like all these apps are in the App Store, and Apple takes a chunk off of that. He wants to be that for VR, and he's doing a pretty good job. I actually own one of his new headsets. I own the old ones and the new ones. I was an early adopter of all things VR. I've had most headsets, and I do have his newest one, and it's interesting. It's an interesting device. What he's doing is really cool. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you dump a bunch of money into anything, eventually you're going to make something kind of cool. And it's interesting. I don't know that it's quite maybe where it needs to be from a standpoint. They definitely marketed it towards they made a device they want you to wear for long periods of time and work in. They want you to work in it. They want you to be able to, like you mentioned, it as an AR device, and it does do that. But it is, like I said, it is really cool. It's not quite there. The pass through, and for those who don't know what that is, that's essentially when you put the headset on, your ability to still see the outside world, and then the headset will just overlay things on top of it. So they call that pass through, and the pass through on it's pretty good. You can still see outside of the headset, and it's pretty seamless in the way it works. The cameras aren't the highest of quality, but they made a really cool device. I've probably put 20 hours or so into it since I've gotten it, and it's like I said, I'm interested in the race. I don't know if they're going to go broke before he realizes his vision. I do agree that overall the technology that is VR and the things that you can do in it are really cool. The problem is that in order for technology like that to take off, there have to be adopters. There has to be reason for developers to spend all this money to develop these applications, these games, these things into it. And right now, the barrier for entry, for the most part, is so high, with the exception of
it's insane.
Facebook's Quest. So you're at a weird spot of like he wants all these developers to just push all this stuff there onto his platform, but the barrier to get into it is pretty rough. So they did a smart thing by making the all-in-one Quest first, and now the Meta Quest Pro, and I'm sure they'll have the Quest 3 this upcoming year. But he's trying to bring the barrier for entry lower, so more people in it, more developers develop more applications, more things to get you into it, so that he can mine that data, sell ads, and make money.
Right, but the other side of that coin too is with the AR, which is I don't know if we defined it, but it's altered reality. But the other side of that is bringing it into the corporate sphere as well, because you could ostensibly cut out, if it's an all-in-one device, you could have something that you put on your face and basically you work in it. Like it is, you could have a headset that you get into and you perform your job duties there. You could have meeting rooms where people are actually physically present and do all kinds of things in a corporate environment as well. Again, that has to be up to snuff and fleshed out. But I think this is the testing or breeding ground for, like you were saying, Chris, being kind of the one-stop shop and the basis of all things, VR, AR. And, if you can get it into the corporate sphere, then you have an even wider market of adoption, right? So I think it's just getting to that point, like you said, is kind of the problem, whether or not he'll go broke before he gets there.
Yeah, and I want to just throw that out there. I mean, laying off 11,000 people, and if I'm not mistaken, this ain't the first round of layoffs Meta's done this year. I really hope I'm not wrong, but that doesn't sound right to me. You know what I mean? Doesn't sound like it's going as well as it should.
Doesn't sound profitable.
Yeah, it's close. I agree,
though. I agree with what Chris is saying. Like the barrier to entry is all super high. Like if somebody's got to do it. You know what I mean? It's Valve isn't doing it. They've got presence in the hardware space, but there's not another Zuckerberg right now in the space. So I do agree with what Chris said about all the hardware and usability and all that. So I just wanted to make that clear. So
it's pretty close. I tried to work in it the other day, briefly, and I personally, it's not quite there for me. I sit very close to my monitors. I like to be able to really see, and I don't want to struggle to look at it. And for me personally, it's not quite there, but if I was a guy and I had one laptop and that's it, one little small 15-inch screen from corner to corner, and I had that was my option, or the headset, I could see myself doing it. It's really cool. You have to really see it and experience it to understand it. But you can legitimately, I think I had 5 screens up, and they were clear enough to read small text. Now I did have to blow them up a little bit,
wow.
but I could have worked in it. It also allowed me to track my keyboard. So there was a small section down below me where pass-through was enabled. I could see the keyboard. I could see my fingers typing. I could see my mouse as well. So I could interact with all my screens like I normally would. I was in a virtual world, but I could still see my actual keyboard and my actual mouse, and was able to work and move things around through that. And it tracks your eyes as well, so it will sharpen the things that you're looking at. And it tracks your facial expressions if you're doing those meeting rooms that Sean spoke about. If I'm in a virtual meeting with you, the move that they're currently working on is they're creating software to take actual 3D renderings of your face and essentially put you into VR, not like a Wii character or what we're used to seeing, but an actual representation of you. Yeah, and this new headset can track your facial expressions, and it does a really good job of those things. I think that they just released the headset sooner than all the software is up to snuff.
This
with
is
it,
like
so
it's like some real Star Wars, like Jedi Council, like, you know what I mean? Like Master Yoda, Mace Windu. I don't know. Look, I'm a big Star Wars fan. You know what I'm talking about, right, Sean? You got the hologram sometime.
Don't even worry about it.
Yeah, exactly, bro. And I look, as somebody who works fully remote, like one thing, I love working fully remote, but like, hey, it'd be great if I could have more interaction with my coworkers when we do have those meetings. And I don't know what that would look like, but I feel like would be something really cool to implement, I think, for everybody when you do have those meetings in those spaces where some of the team is maybe not necessarily, I mean, especially in today, this is very like a realistic scenario where not everybody is physically present in these meeting spaces, right? So anyways, yeah, cool stuff. Matt, take us into our main topic.
Okay, guys. So vulnerability management. First off, what is vulnerability management in this context? When I think about vulnerability management, I think about all the risks that my company has to deal with, and I go a little further and I think about our nation and society as well, and I think about how do I patch up those, or how do I shore up those risks and mitigate them. Or, sometimes just decide there's nothing I can do about it and write up a contingency plan or something like that. In terms of IT, a lot of times that can mean patching your stuff. Unfortunately, it's not always that easy as just, clicking a button, right? I'm sure everybody here has at least one story where they, had to go look at a vulnerability, and something came up on your list of problems, or someone said go figure out what to do here about this problem, and it wasn't so easy as just hitting the update button.
No, yeah, I mean, I have a couple, well, I have quite a few, but those trying to push buttons and thinking everything's good, and then ending up being a lot more work or breaking a bunch of things. There was one in particular where they had domain suffixes where they didn't like that there were multiple domain garbage. And so I was like, okay, this will be fine. I'll just merge these all into a single suffix. It's not a big deal. You just swap all the users over into the suffix you want. No problem. So coordinate it. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to do this. And I swap every single user over to this suffix, go to bed peacefully, wake up the next day, absolute fire. It had broken some communication with a core application because it was looking for that suffix. And I didn't catch that part because it's a part of the environment that, was handled by local IT. And so I changed it over, and it was literally like 3 or 4 days of us trying to fix it and work with the vendor to get this application working again. It was a nightmare, but it was like innocuous enough. I looked at it. I even had some other people look at it, and they're like, yeah, it should be fine. Go ahead. And it borked a lot of things. So it is very true that vulnerability management is much more complex because it's integrated into a web of things that, you pull this string, and then all of a sudden 40 other strings get pulled that you had no idea were happening, like, or even attached.
Mm-hmm. And try to read the patch notes, man. A lot of times, and patch notes are where somebody lists out, the things that they're fixing in whatever the next iteration of the software is. And they also list out the things that they know that they broke. And so sometimes you'll get, on your list of things that you have to fix, you'll get, that you have to go to the next patch up. You can't just program it away or do so, or, make a configuration change or whatever. You have to go to the next patch up. Unfortunately, you may break core functionality, and it may list it there in the patch notes, but sometimes going through 70 pages of document doesn't feel really feasible when you have to manage, hundreds of devices, some of which it isn't always the same device that you're managing. It makes it, it makes it really, really challenging.
Yeah, I was going to mention that too. I rely a lot on crowdsourcing because a lot of my day-to-day is patch management, more specifically for the Windows OS itself and what it's got going on. But so often it is a matter, I should say, of pros versus cons. It's like, hey, this newest patch, this newest roll-up fixes these 3 things, but it also introduces these 2 problems. And those 2 problems are, they could be, oh, this sort of printer doesn't work in the environment anymore. Like something just completely off the cuff, off the wall, something you would never even think about. But, so often, like I said, I'm kind of like crowdsourcing that. I'm, sometimes, unfortunately, it's, oh, one of these computers did get the patch and we found out the hard way that it broke it. A lot of time we do beta rings of groups of machines where the patches go out early and we know right off the rip, oh, this is not something we want pushed out to, X amount of thousand of endpoints. So we very quickly pull it back from those machines. We blacklist the update and we hope that it's fixed next month, sort of deal. And so there's this constant kind of like tug of war over, is it something I can patch? Because a lot of times we are patching for vulnerabilities. We're patching for exploits, but we have to weigh, is the vulnerability that bad to where we're going to kill this, these 3 pieces of core functionality, or can we wait until everything is actually ready to be released and ready to be patched? So it's kind of tough. I'm sure. So
go ahead, I have some questions, and I want to throw some of this into like layman's terms, more so for myself. But before I do that, we have a guest contributor, as Matt expressed earlier, and I wanted to just take a pause really quick and let Mr. Wedgeworth here introduce himself, and I guess tell the world why he chose to
be a guest on our show.
No, there was a
guest
word
appearance.
be a guest appearance. I butchered it. It's all right. Chris, can you tell the people a little bit about yourself and start talking so that I don't completely fumble the rest of this episode?
Yeah, no problem. My name is Chris Wedgeworth, as he already pointed out, and I do work or have worked with everyone in here, and a big point of my job is vulnerability management, so it made a lot of sense for me to be here today. From a day-to-day standpoint, I do a lot of scanning and remediation of different vulnerabilities that I personally think are important enough to fix immediately. And listening to you guys talk about it, a couple things really kind of quickly came to mind. And the first one, man, is it's really unfortunate that, as far as I can tell, or in my experience right now, vulnerability remediation or vulnerabilities in general are a very reactive topic. Unfortunately, most companies, most places don't really understand how important this stuff is. A lot of people still think of being robbed or being stolen as, physical entry into their domain and taking something. And honestly, that's just really not the case anymore. There are a ton of things and a ton of vulnerabilities out there that are low hanging that a high school, middle school kid could exploit, and data is cash nowadays. We talked about it earlier with Facebook and how they make their money, but it's the same thing with all companies. Your data and what you have, whether I use it for my own, nefarious deeds or I sell it to someone else who does, like that data is what is what's worth money nowadays. And unfortunately, like I said, there are a lot of things out there that you can do to protect yourself that just a lot of people don't either understand or don't care enough or don't realize how big of a deal it is. Luckily, where I'm at now and a lot of the clients that I currently work with, they are, they're regulated where they have to care about those things. And so I get to deal with a lot of clientele that do care about those. And so I'm in it on a day-to-day basis. Like I said, I use different tools to scan networks and I find things. And my process for remediating things is pretty simple, really. I look at it from a standpoint of how realistic is this thing to happen? Because vulnerability remediation is a cat and mouse game. It's kind of like documentation. You're never going to completely be done, ever. There's no way to do it. There's things you don't know that are there yet. And there's just always some things. So my job, the main point of it is to look at all the things that I can see with the tools that are given to me. And I go, how realistic is it that these things could be exploited for this client? And I look at it and I go, okay, now if it is exploited, what does that mean? And I will rank these in a hierarchy and go, okay, I care about these things. These things, I kind of care about them. And these things I'm not super worried about. Of those things that I really care about, I look for things that are, we call them wide brush strokes. What's the smallest change that I can make to affect the most endpoints or to affect the endpoint with the most amount of vulnerabilities on it? Once I identify what that is, I have a testing methodology that I like to use where I go, the first thing I do is I go, what is the vulnerability? What is the thing that I'm trying to fix? When I realize what it is, how can I fix it? Do I understand how to fix it? Do I understand what it's saying? And do I understand the fix? Once I get that down, I go, how do I reverse what I'm about to do? If it breaks completely, how do I turn this completely back and get back to where we were ahead of time so that I'm not completely destroying the environment? And then I'll segment some test machines and I'll do this and I'll have, I'll try and have users or end users work on these machines for a couple days, couple hours, depending on what the vulnerability is. And did they notice anything weird? Did I notice anything weird? Do I have to roll it back? And as I get this data in and I feel more comfortable that the change that I made isn't adversely affecting the client or the environment, I will roll it out, on a wider spread target of machines and get that out there and move on to the next thing that I, have on my list and of the hierarchy of importance. And it's, like I said, it's a never ending thing. There's never nothing to do. There's always something I can look into. A lot of things I see over and over again. Go ahead.
So Chris, let me ask you, look, and I guess this is a question for everybody, but I'm going to point this at Chris here first. So when we're talking about vulnerability management, to put this in layman's terms, we're talking about literally kind of, are you scanning the entire environment? Are you scanning the entire, and you're just looking for areas or points of interest that would specifically be vulnerable? Or what are you, how do you know what to look for? Like when you're looking at these specific clients, how do you guys break that down? Because I know you have a very specific, set of things that you're looking at. But then I know that like somebody like Brent is also looking at another set of things. And then somebody like Matt or Sean are going to be looking at a separate tier of things, or maybe those things are intermixed. So I guess that is my main question. I guess when we're looking at vulnerability management at its base level for each of you, in your certain jobs, like what does that really mean?
Yeah. I'll start off with this. There's three big, I would say, kind of types of vulnerabilities that I personally look at. We have external, internal, and internal credentialed. Most of my stuff is going to be internal, non-credentialed. However, I do look at all of them. So external would be if I am not in your building, if I'm out somewhere else and all I have is your public IP address, what can I do to get into your network from outside? Not plugging anything in, just I know your address and that's it. Those are external vulnerabilities. Those are hit from the outside world. I do look at those and I do remediate those, but there's not as many of those. Internal is if I walked into your building and I plugged into your wall, plugged into a jack that you left open somewhere with my computer, and I happen to be somewhere that you didn't see me, or I got a device in somehow and I'm in your network, but I don't have any credentials. I don't have a username. I don't have a password. I don't have admin anything. What damage could I do doing that? And then the last one is a credential scan. And that means I'm in your network and I have credentials to a user account. What can I do from there? Can I elevate? Can I do that? Now, I don't really focus so much on the latest terms, because if someone gets, in my opinion, for most of our clients, if someone gets into the environment and they have credentials, we are already in a big heap of trouble. And because it's never ending, my biggest goal is to stop you from getting to that point. So I focus external first. Don't even get into the network. Internal second. If you get in that you don't have credentials, can I stop you from getting credentials? And then in a perfect world where I had the perfect client and everything was wrapped up, I then would start credential scans and look at patching things that that if you had a username, I could stop you from getting further.
Okay, so this is I'm gonna stop you right there. That is perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for. I want to take a pause here and let everybody know I currently work with Chris, and I've worked with Chris for a very long time. I have had more insight into what Chris does in the last 30 minutes than in the last however many years we've been working together. And this is very insightful. So, hey, Chris, I appreciate you willing to just be a part of this, man. It's great stuff all around, at least for me. So I want to stop right there, and I want to transition over to Brent. Brent, I feel like your answer to this question for what you're looking for as far as like vulnerability management, like I'm very interested to see how, like, what your perspective on it is. I hope I can like be open and say, like, Brent works with the NOC stuff. So is your perspective different working in the NOC versus like Chris's perspective kind of in the trenches?
A little bit. I mean, there is a lot of overlap. So a lot of it is working with Chris, or working with, folks like Chris who are doing the same sort of stuff. They're doing the scans, they're using those tools that he was speaking of to get that information. And a lot of it could, boil back up to me, and it could be, hey, we need to get these patches going to fix this vulnerability that I found with this tool, sort of deal. So like I said, a lot of my work or a lot of what I do in regards to the patching side of it is crowdsourced. And by that, I mean, I've got people bringing it to me. It's very rare that I'm looking for it myself. So that's kind of where we differentiate a little bit. Is I'm not digging for the vulnerabilities. I'm just patching when someone brings it to my attention. And that could be someone on the team. That could be I could be reading Reddit out of all things and hear about this new 0-day thing going on. I'm like, oh God, no, let's go figure out how we patch this thing out. Or it could be a bulletin from Microsoft directly saying, hey, we messed up. This patch could have gone out over the course of, this last 24 hours. We've since pulled it from the update servers, but if you still have it on some of these servers, you're either going to want to roll it back, or you're going to want to, blacklist it if you're running, your own update server and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different variables, but that would be the key difference between him and I, is that he's looking for him and I'm not really looking for him, but I am patching for him.
Yeah, no, and that makes a lot of sense as far as just working with, all of you guys in the different capacities. This makes a lot of sense. Being in the meetings, a lot of the same meetings very recently, Brent, just kind of tracking, or getting insight into what you're looking into or what you are tracking, and being able to take, your words now and put that into perspective once I look back on, those meetings and what Chris is talking about. You know what I mean? I like to, in my mind, Chris is like a soldier on the front lines. You know what I'm saying? He's clearing rooms. He's looking for these, where the bad guys at. Where the bad guys at, once they're found, they get passed all the way up the top. And now you're tracking, the bigger picture. This is how we snuff these guys out. And it just kind of goes back and forth. So, man, hey, I appreciate you guys. Matt, I want to, from a cybersecurity perspective, I know that we've kind of, some of this may be getting kind of redundant now. I'm sure, as Brent mentioned, there's a lot of overlap here, but what's kind of your perspective going into vulnerability management? And the big piece here is, are there any key differences with how you look at vulnerability management in comparison to somebody like Brent in the NOC world, or Mr. Chris Wedgeworth in the, client support role?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I see it through a different lens. I definitely see it through Chris's lens, the external, the internal, and the creds. And I think that's just a beautiful way to break that up. At the end of the day, like they have to get in somehow, right? And if you're hardening your doors on the external, and then you're hardening your internal, maybe you put in a network access control system or something that just doesn't allow any Joe Blow computer on the network. That's a great way to shore up vulnerabilities. For example, I like to hunt down the known exploited vulnerabilities. CISA, our cybersecurity agency here in America, does post a list of known vulnerabilities. If you ascribe to a NOC or something, they should probably have an idea of known vulnerabilities that are actively being exploited in the wild. Explicitly, I'm looking for things in malware kits, like Metasploit, if you've heard of that.
Okay.
Or Cobalt Strike. What it is it's basically a program that hacks other computers, right? And it makes it so somebody with basically no knowledge of like how to actually exploit these things can just drop into a network and be like, give me admin credentials, encrypt all this encrypt all these files, make them give me Bitcoin to decrypt these files, right?
That's a bad day there.
That's a bad day, and it's a pretty realistic day. You know,
that's
how
a
do you
business
get in?
ending potential bad day as well.
Yeah, man, back up.
Just terrible.
That goes back,
apparently,
yeah.
That goes back to what Chris was saying, that
Mhm.
people don't take it seriously enough, because
Yeah.
I don't have enough digits on my hand to count the number of businesses that I've encountered that have been Ryuked or, you know, just encrypted to no end, where they can't, like, hard non-functioning business.
Yeah, you restore some backup.
I want to take a second. I don't know if maybe you guys have explained it before, but just for those who don't understand, there's kind of two different thoughts processes of why we're patching these vulnerabilities, or what the end game for someone who's exploiting these vulnerabilities are. There's, I'm going to take your data and I'm going to sell it and or use it, or I'm going to lock it so you can't use it. And the second half, the latter half, is what we see more often. And when we're saying something's encrypted, they essentially go through and they change the type of file for everything you have, every file, every program, every picture, every thought, every memo you've written down, and they lock it. So when you go to open it up, it does nothing. No documents, no saves, no nothing. Everything is locked.
So this is important. This is important to me as a user, right? Whether I own the company or whether I'm, you know, some Joe Schmo at the bottom of the totem pole here. This is important to me as a part of this organization, because I could essentially cost the company large amounts, if not entire servers worth, droves of very critical, business critical data by not having these things patched.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it could be legal problems too. Like, so like Chris was saying, people will exfiltrate your data, and if you have what's considered like information that's covered by HIPAA or something like that, and that gets sold, you may have like, depending on who you are, you may have to report that to state and local governments. You may have to release a public news statement in state and local media, or state and national media, and that at the end of the day, that is the goal of patch management and vulnerability remediation. It's stopping pain like this, basically. And I mean, it's a lot of work, but it's worth it.
Can we take a second here, just really quick? What are there any like recent events in maybe the last year that we can think of that like we could tie to this? Like, have there been any breaches or
look at the oil pipeline?
Oh my gosh, I love the oil pipeline as an example. These people, everybody remembers the oil pipeline, and what happened is they got their systems ransomed and encrypted. Oh my gosh, this story sucks. They got their systems encrypted. They shut down gas on the eastern seaboard, skyrocketing gas prices. They shut it down explicitly, not because they couldn't pump oil and gas, because they could do that, but their mechanisms to read how much gas they were pumping no longer functioned. So they weren't able to figure out how much to freaking charge people. So they shut it down. In the end, they did pay the ransom, you know, and they went to go decrypt, but it was too slow. And so they had to restore from backup anyways. The backup that they had decided would be more painful to restore from than like the multi-million-dollar ransom. Oh my gosh. Ugh.
So this is very, I appreciate you guys being able to just like coin this at the drop of a hat. You know what I mean? I vaguely feel like I remember hearing about this, and I now have more insight. So I appreciate you. Thank you. Sean, I want to circle back to you really quick. I didn't forget about you. Didn't want to leave you out. I feel like, in my perspective, in my mind, I put you in the same category as Chris. You're out there in the trenches. You know what I mean? You're a vulnerability finder, is the term I'm going to use here. But I want to give you the floor here. Do you feel like, you know, how does your perspective kind of differ to these guys? Do you agree? Do you have any big changes here?
Hold on 1 second, real quick. Real quick.
Oh,
I just want to say,
quick. Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. There's one thing I want to point out. So I want to point out the vulnerability for the Colonial Pipeline was an exposed password for a VPN account where there was no multi-factor authentication. And in this case, the patch would have been to apply multi-factor authentication and rotate your passwords, or do not reuse passwords across multiple accounts. So make sure that you're using multi-factor and use password managers. Sorry, I felt like I needed to close that loop about what the
I appreciate it.
was and how you make that son of a gun go the F away, because it costs millions of dollars. By the way, the payout, $4.4 million, had to restore from backups anyway. All right, Sean, the floor is yours. My TED Talk is over.
I just want one. That's it. No. So no, I would say that, yeah, Chris and I are on a similar level. I would say he's probably a little bit more versed in that world, because I've been out of it for a little bit. But the only thing I could potentially add is that some of the vulnerabilities don't necessarily come from us finding them, but from third parties that are hired in order to audit them. And so in addition to our own pen testing or penetration testing, some of those things can come from a third party, and there are plenty of those out there. It's kind of like white hat hacking in a sense, because what they do is they go in and they have either proprietary tools or more in-depth tools, or things that are targeted towards specific regulated entities. And so part of that can come from
as well,
yeah, social engineering. So when we're talking about this encryption and getting all of your crap encrypted, that can come from an email. Like, you can click a hyperlink, and then that just installs a bad actor on a particular machine, and then it starts rolling. So some of those things also come from, like, and this is why at your jobs now you're seeing a lot more of an influx of phishing attempts or social engineering via emails, right? So when you get those emails from, you can be a little bit more aware, because that's another side of this vulnerability remediation is, at the end of the day, it's people, right? Your lowest, lower end users, as far as, and what I mean by that is, the people doing the jobs need to be educated.
Like hierarchically low in, like, the company hierarchy, the people who you see, taking the orders and stuff like that, or processing data, the people who make the business churn and gear every single day. Those are the people who are the most exposed. And it's weird to think of it that way.
Dude, it could be all the way down to the receptionist. Like, the receptionist could, I know a personal story where, this receptionist, she was innocuously working at her job, got an email. It looked like it came from the CEO. Click that button, boom, the entirety of their infrastructure zapped, gone. It's locked down, and they're paying money because they didn't have backups. So again, I'm just more so adding to the, I guess, scope of adding that personal aspect of making sure that your end users are educated to not be so, I don't want to say exploitable, but to make them aware. And so they're less likely to do those things, because that is a front line. But yeah, I also wanted to mention the fact that there are third parties that can come in and audit as well.
I actually have a lot to say about the people aspect of that, and that it's important to recognize that training your staff is an important component of vulnerability management as well.
Wait, hold on. Wait, Matt, this is perfect. Yeah. I'm going to pause you right there, because this is a good, I want to ask the question for all of you. And Matt, I'll pass this back over to you to start, of really just what makes this difficult. I feel like my perspective, one of the hardest parts I would think would be the end user side. Like, coming from a military background, like, my idea of, like, that just presents to me, when I think about all of the end users as a potential fail point, that gives me anxiety. You know what I mean? If I have to manage that from a security perspective, right? Yeah. And so I guess the question, I'll give you guys like a two-pronged kind of perspective. Where do you guys feel in each of your backgrounds or your jobs, or where you come from in your experience, what makes vulnerability management hard? Matt, I want to start this off with you.
Okay. First, I want to talk about the people component. The most common vulnerability, exploits are occurring because of one of only a few things that happening. Somebody is getting their email compromised. There's a human exploit occurring. Somebody gives up a password, presses an MFA prompt, so or something like that. They install a file. I have stories that would make your toes curl about what people will do. And then there's misconfiguration, which I would argue is training of staff and ensuring that you have proper policies in place to double check things. And lastly, I feel like it's just getting people to care, and that's pretty hard to do also. Overall, getting people to care about this stuff is very challenging, and it's one of the major ways that exploits happen. Johnny end user isn't thinking about credential theft. You know what they're thinking about?
Right.
They're thinking about getting the report done. You know why? Because they need to get the report done before end of business, or the boss is going to tell them that they didn't get the report done in time. And I personally feel like it takes a really strong culture throughout the company to mitigate that. And I would say that's for both of these vulnerabilities. The third one being patching, by the way. Sorry, I forgot to drop that right in line. And which I also think is a culture thing. You need to have a company culture that says it's important that we take time away from working on like production that makes money to work on patch management that saves us from insurance claims, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, but that's the same thing. We need, your end user staff to be taking the time to be like, I have time to look at every email and ensure that it meets standard, right? And not just be like, oh man, I better get to my next email, because if I don't get to my next email, then I'll be off target. And that same thing for staff, who, oh, I'm setting up a VPN account, did I put MFA? Ah, man, I'm pretty sure I did. I just need to move to the next thing. Nope, didn't get MFA on there. Account gets breached. So that's, I guess the question is, why is it hard? And it's because it takes time and energy, and time and energy devoted to this is not time and energy devoted to making revenue. And, how do you fix it? From my perspective, at the biggest answer is that you have a culture that cares about cybersecurity from the top down, and, believes that investing in this is a good, it is insurance to in its own way, but that it's good, healthy insurance that prevents you from, taking out a massive insurance policy and having to pay $20,000 a year in cyber insurance because you had a breach last year, or a month, $20,000 a month, maybe.
Which is crazy. It is crazy because when you think about it, and you just and you look at it, you hear about these big breaches. You hear about, I mean, we're talking about this pipeline hack, and it was like, hey, they didn't have MFA, and it's like taking the time to train your guys up on this does not mean that they're going to be out of pocket for hours and hours and hours, on end. You know what I mean? It's a quick spin up on, this is MFA, this is what this, you know what I mean? Or it's like, man, you hear about breaches that happen because, I don't know, the password was stupid. It was like password 1234 or something. I'm exaggerative there, but you know what I mean? It's like, man, these things are preventable.
The password for
and so it's
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't say 5, but you say 5. It was close enough.
Chris, what do you got for us, man?
Yeah, I think a great question is, if you're listening to us talk about this right now, and you own a business, or you are in charge of security for your company, what are the things that you can do to protect yourself?
Yeah.
And I think there's a multitude of answers there. I think the first and foremost, and the one that we keep hinting at, is called patching. And if you don't know what that is, it's literally just applying the updates to your operating systems or the programs that you use every day. These companies go through and they find vulnerabilities in their own code, and they will release hot patches or hot fixes for these things. And your job as managing this is to install those, or to have someone else do that. So patching is the first line of defense for a lot of these things. Another thing that you need to worry about is physical or administrative limitations and processes. MFA, multi-factor, lockdown of USB, using jump host to get to your networking equipment, setting a strong password policy. All these things are very important, and you can do these without bothering the end user, and they don't think anything of it because they're used to it. Speaking of end user, if you run the company, how do you convince your employee, your front desk person, to care about vulnerabilities? The secret is you can't. You just can't. There's no way to do it. That person's not, they're worried about going home at the end of the day. So what you have to do is to train them without training them, if that makes sense. Phishing training, simulations, social engineering tests that are happening all the time to the point that they are so used to seeing them that they can point out these, because as a professional, I can look at an email usually pretty quickly and go, yeah, that's a phishing thing. But for someone who hasn't ever seen one before, it's really hard for them to know the difference. So getting these third-party companies or doing them yourself to test these things on a regular basis and actually following up with users that fail these things and training them to just see them without thinking about it, that's how you can protect yourself. Whereas just forcing them to go through a click-through video thing isn't going to do the same thing. They're going to maybe listen to it or maybe just click to the end and do the little test and get the certificate and be done with it. You really need to spend the time training and working with these people so they're used to seeing it. And then the last thing being my job, which is vulnerability scanning and remediation. As important as that is, these other things, these other fruits are so much lower hanging and easier to exploit that you really have to just put merit into them before you even start scanning and remediating. Now, if you have all those things out and you feel comfortable with that, then yeah, let's look at your, the different SSL certs that you're using or the cryptologies that you're using to for the traffic and all these other things that you could be doing. We could talk about it till I'm blue in the face. There's millions of them, but none of those things matter if you don't have the proper things ahead of those things to train your people and to have your company set up the correct way.
So, Chris, just really quickly, I know that you work a lot. You do a lot of like vulnerability management, but you also, you are kind of the deliverer of this news, or for better or worse, to the client. Do you feel like you've ever had a hard time like pitching the things that you're talking about right now and getting the client to understand why those things are important? And can you speak to how you've kind of earned their trust or kind of brought them, how you led them to water, so to speak, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I'm really lucky that a lot of my clients are just regulated to have to care about it. So it's pretty easy. I think
fair enough.
We keep throwing the word vulnerability management around, and it's really easy to not understand exactly what that means. Now, vulnerability management, I wish it meant we fix all the things, but what it really means is just knowing what they are and understanding the risks that are in place and accepting what you can fix and what you can't fix. So when we say vulnerability management, we don't mean fixing everything. We mean knowing what's out there and managing what we care about and fixing those things. Oftentimes, I will, for a lot of these vulnerabilities that are maybe the hardest things to sell to a client or to an end user are the things that make their life harder. If you're a guy who runs a construction company or a doctor's office or a lawyer's office, MFA is incredibly annoying. Your password policy is incredibly annoying. USB lockdown, incredibly annoying. So the hardest part of my job is to explain to them how easily exploitable these things are and how, as annoying as this stuff is, why it's important and why we should do it. And also getting that across before they are compromised and it's too late.
And a lot of that is also what Matt said is regarding culture, because if you have good management and you have a client or management that sees that as important, then they'll make it apparent to those end users that, yes, this is annoying, but we give you grace, or, we allow this in your schedule for this to be done for the greater good. And sometimes that's not always apparent. And I was actually going to say that what Chris pointed out, the end user impact is one of the hardest selling points for
so hard, man,
getting vulnerabilities taken care of. Anytime it impacts the end users, it's so hard, man, because you get a whole slew of your workforce going, I hate this. It takes like 5 minutes out of my day. And it's like, okay, but that 5 minutes
that's
could
where
make
the
or
culture
break
thing
a lot of
comes
different
back in,
things.
right? Because it's the trick of getting the end users to understand that if they do not do this, then instead they're going to be down for a week when they get cryptoed and they get the easy, privilege escalation off of Print Nightmare, right? I mean, any PC that's still vulnerable to Print Nightmare, and in case, you guys all missed it, Print Nightmare is the vulnerability where if your computer can print, then you can hijack that and you can hijack that service and run administrative commands as system. So if that PC isn't patched, if anything gets on there that knows that how to look for that and then exploit it, it's game over. And they at that point they can start trying to dump credentials or whatever files they have, they can encrypt them, or more than likely they'll try to spread to other systems throughout the network and try to make those things phone home too. I mean, bro, it's a nightmare. But the problem is, how do you get somebody that like their goal for the day is literally to process the Excel sheet, whatever it is. They just need to make it do the thing that it's supposed to do and then perform the analysis and deliver the report. It's very challenging, and that's where the culture comes through. Like, you have to have, like, literally your middle management needs to be going, hey, are you thinking about ransomware? I know ransomware hasn't happened in our company, but are you aware that it could happen? I'm talking about that on a regular basis, not just once a year when it's annual security training time and you gotta, put on the video and put your, rest your face on your hand and wait for 20 minutes for it to finish.
We've also really mentioned a few times about backups and returning from backups, and that's something that I didn't speak of earlier, and it's really hard to overstate how important having backups of your systems are. And when I say a backup, oftentimes for a lot of these systems, whether it be your servers or even some end user workstations, it's literally a snapshot in time that is taken on different bases, whether it be hourly or daily, of that machine, and then stored hopefully in two places. Best practice, in my opinion, would be to take a backup and have it locally somewhere on a piece of hardware that you own, but then also replicated somewhere off-site. And to also have these backups on a machine that is not domain joined, so that if I'm an attacker that gets into your domain and I get domain admin credentials and I'm going through and encrypting everything, I can't get to your backups. Because if I can get to your backups, that makes you hit that button to pay me the Bitcoin faster. And so backups are super important. I can't overstate how much of my job as a vulnerability scanner or remediator is checking backups and making sure we have good backups and replicas of those backups in case the backups go down.
How you open your doors the next day.
Yep. And that's part of what Brent does as well.
It is.
That's part of knocking it, Brent, is like going through and
that's a big part of it. A big part of it, talking about the whole not being able to be touched, is the immutable part of that, which they can't just be deleted. They can't be accessed with standard domain credentials. There's other gateways. There's other doors that have to be opened somewhere on the infrastructure for the client in order to access these things. You don't want it to be easy for that receptionist and his or her user account to be able to tap into the infrastructure of the network and then somehow by way of that same account get access to the backups.
Nightmare.
That's not what you want. And in so many cases, that is happening. That is exactly what's happening at a lot of companies. Right. It's just too often. So that's how these malicious actors, these pretty much these businesses, because they are businesses, their whole goal is to make money. And so they are a business that is trying to make money by exploiting companies and exploiting their data. And a lot of times it's not, we talked about a little bit, hey, they want to get your data and they want to sell it. Well, that's more along the like spear phishing route. That's where they're like very specifically trying to take down a very specific person at a company and a very specific company on top of that. And then they know which data they want and they've already got a buyer for it. In most cases though, it's really the ransomware side of it. They really want to, they want to hold the data ransom because really the data doesn't mean crap to them. But it means everything to the business that's getting ready to lose it, because without it, that business is no more. They're shut down. And then the backups are like, that will allow you to avoid having to negotiate with these people without having to, spend any money to that malicious actor. You can say, hey guys, that's fine that you got our data. We don't even care anymore. We've got backups. We're going to be back up and running next business day.
I mean, man, that's the best case scenario.
So really, I mean, if you have all of the, if you have the right tools in place, the right people in place, the right engineers in place, you've got a good IT company behind you, you've got backups in place, you've got good DR, you know what I mean, across the board. Really the impact for, the trench workers, whether it be Chris or Sean or Brent up in the NOC or Matt or whoever, and the workforce as a whole, both parts of that, the impact is very minimal. As long as these things are in place prior to a breach, happening due to something that was left unpatched for too long.
Minimal in comparison.
Minimal in comparison.
I do want to throw that out there because it's still a huge interruption. It's a huge interruption for all parties involved, regardless.
Now, can we talk about, what does this look like? I mean, in a worst case scenario, if you don't have any of these things and I'm a company, or a client who, oh crap, now I understand how important this stuff is. I would imagine that, is it possible for me to bounce back if I don't have something like backups or like I have to just kind of go through the payday and then,
very unlikely.
You know what I mean? Like that's really my only option, right? Is to kind of bend at the will of.
You're going to pay for the data and you're going to get it back, but who knows if that data is intact, number one. And what I mean by intact is there's no additional malicious actors where they can just do it again. So the biggest problem with paying is that they either give you your data back. Sometimes it's clean, sometimes it's not. The other part is they may just take your money and run.
And bro, they will resell your creds. They will resell the creds that they stole from your environment to other people. Breaches, and they will say these people paid. Yeah, right. They will say they will resell your creds. They'll say, hey, you should buy these credentials. These idiots paid. They didn't change their credentials.
Right.
And they will sell it to the next people down the line, and you will be breached again in 9 months.
You really need to work with what's known as a cybersecurity breach specialist.
Yes, you need a specialist.
Yeah, you have to have a specialist because they will lead you down the path of what steps need to be taken depending on the type of data that you have, whether it's a compliance regulated sort of data, if we're talking HIPAA or anything like that. There's a ton of other ones. I'm not going to go down that path because there's more than even I know, but you need to, at that point, you really, instead of you negotiating with that malicious actor directly, you need to go ahead and just accept the fact that this is going to cost you money. The mistake's already been made. There's no getting around that. You need to hire a team of cybersecurity breach specialists, and they will essentially navigate those torrential waters with you. It's a teamwork thing by that point. You really have to work with them. They work with you.
Realistically, if you get breached, the first person that you need to call is your lawyer. You need to
and that's something that company will help you navigate. They will help you navigate that legality side of things.
I was just about to say,
but also with law enforcement and all that.
I'll say to also clarify, just because you have backups, you still need to contact a breach specialist. And the reason being is just because you have a backup of it, you don't know when this malicious actor got in. You don't know how far back. You don't know what backups you have are good and what backups you have are bad. Exactly. You need to get someone in who can pinpoint how they got in and figure out what of your backups are still good. Because if you restore from a backup that's still compromised, you're right back where you were when you started. And Sean mentioned it earlier, just because you send this Bitcoin to this person doesn't mean they're going to decrypt your data. And it doesn't mean that it's going to work, even if they do try to decrypt your data. It's a lot of these programs aren't really made to be the most, end user friendly or effective. They're made to lock the files. They don't really care as much if they unlock because they got paid.
Oh, and another huge piece of advice while I'm thinking about it, because I just don't want to forget about it. Do not, if you feel like your company has been hit with ransomware or some other malicious piece of software, do not shut everything down. Do not cut the power to your endpoints. Unplug it from the internet. Unplug the entire network from the, from the internet, so that's not talking out anymore. But do not shut them down, because so often what ends up happening is when you start working with one of these companies and they're doing the forensic look at, hey, how did this malicious actor get into the infrastructure? What did they touch? What did they take? So on and so forth. If you shut down that machine, or you shut down the entirety of the infrastructure, switches, firewalls, stuff like that, a lot of times those things are set to purge logs when they shut down. And if you boot everything back up and you don't have logs, you are down a creek without the paddle. And you can think of the name of that creek, but it makes it a lot worse for everybody. So the big key there, because I feel like it's hammered in everybody's head. I'm going to turn it off, because if it's off, no one can get anything anymore. Unplug it from the internet. That's the big key one.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you can't, sometimes you can't trust whoever's running the endpoint to disconnect it from the internet effectively. Sometimes they're on Wi-Fi and it's hard to be click this button and that button. I mean, at the end of the day, it is better to turn it off than to let it spread, I'd say. But in general, you do want those logs. And a lot of times the real information you want is sitting in volatile memory or RAM, and it'll be gone. And there is no get it back. And then you just have a mystery that you're not going to get solved. Sad times.
And a lot of times cybersecurity insurance will not cover the incident if you cannot prove that it happened by way of those logs. Yeah. So if, like, you know, for instance, you say, yeah, I had all the security, you know, things in place, and they're like, okay, well, back it up with logs, and you don't have logs to give them. Guess who's not getting a payout?
Yeah. Remember, cybersecurity insurance is insurance. They do not want to pay you. Like that's just it. They don't.
Yep. 100% correct.
Yeah.
And they will find a way to not.
They lose money. Yeah.
Exactly.
We've done a great job of, I think, scaring people enough about encryption and all that done with all their data. But one thing we haven't really touched about, and I can see someone, if they walked away from this podcast listening to it, going back and not understanding, is scareware.
Oh yeah,
that's a big one that might make you think that you have a lot of things to do when in fact you just have a browser to close. I'm sure every one of us in here has a story with a family friend or a user that has seen a pop-up that says your files are encrypted. Please call me now to fix it. And that is a huge business out there for companies that don't even get into your data or touch anything. It's a pop-up. And I've seen it, unfortunately, even personally. I know some buddies whose parents who have paid $800 to $1,000 because their computer got a pop-up that said they have a thing, and they called a person to fix it, and the guy from wherever he was or doing whatever, you know, took a credit card information, they got paid, and then he showed them how to close their browser. So that's one of those things when Brent said, if you think you've been compromised, contact someone who knows, let them look at it, let them assess the situation. Don't call the people, don't unplug it, don't turn it off. Like, call someone who knows what they're doing and lets these people do their job and get you out of this murky water that you've got yourself into.
Yeah.
So I feel like we've covered a lot of good stuff here, and I want to kind of bring us to a kind of soft close here with some closing thoughts. I feel like we've covered best practices pretty well, but I'm going to loop that into like closing thoughts. And what do you guys, you know, or maybe we take it the route that like kind of Chris was going. If there's one thing that you want, you know, our listener to take away from this, what is it? What's on your guys' minds? What are we thinking here?
Okay, I'll go first. I've got like 2 or 3 quick things. One is you got to update your stuff. I think I said it first episode. We talked about Log4j. Update your stuff. It's still relevant. You know, 8 months later, update your stuff. It's number one thing. Number 2, multi-factor authentication. If you're doing it, those are the 2 biggest vulnerabilities that I can think of. And then number 3, watch your email. They're coming for you with them phishing attacks, and your text messages too. So keep your eyes up, and you know, don't get tricked. Those are my 3 things: update your stuff, MFA, and don't get tricked.
I would, to piggyback off that, I have some similar ones and a couple more. Number 1, as he said, patch, update your stuff. Can't say it enough. If we say it 5 times in a row right now, it's important. Please patch. Number 2, physical administrative limitations and processes. Set these things in order so that your users don't think about them. Set MFA up, set USB lockdown, use jump host, set your password policy. The list goes on. There's a number of things you can do so that no one thinks about it and it's done. Number 3, training with your end users. Run phishing campaigns, run social engineering tests, pay someone else to come in and test your users, get them trained without them realizing they're being trained. Number 4, backups. Make sure you have clean backups, keep them clean, keep them on site, off site, everywhere. Make sure you can't get to them. And then number 5, just because it's what I do and I want to stay employed, vulnerability scanning and remediation. It's important. It's just as important as the rest of them. Make sure you're scanning some of these things that are, even if they're above your pay grade of what you can understand, it's important as well. But those 5 things, you take care of all those things, you should be good.
I love the energy. I love that little self plug you threw there on the back end there, Chris, just to, keep it relevant. You know what I'm saying? Hey, Britt, what do you got for us?
Oh man, takeaways. What those guys said. I mean, all of those things, man. I'm not going to hammer those in again. I would say just the knowledge that there is help out there. There are legitimate places out there that can help you determine whether something is malicious or not. I mean, you should always be second guessing some of these kind of crazy emails that come in and things of that nature. Even if you're at the very top of the company, even if you're the one working IT for a company, you should be second guessing things that come through your email box that you are not expecting, because it's so easy. I mean, a lot of times you're 1 or 2 clicks away from just complete disaster. So I just want everybody to think about it.
I feel like that's a really good like rule of thumb there. Like, this is, I mean, Brent, working with, you know, I've worked at the, you know, the same company for a couple years here, and Brent has been kind of a mentor for myself in this space. And I just, you know, our company practices, you know, we do these, you know, these spam tests that get all, you know, we get these fake emails that get sent, and we got to, you know, kind of sift them out. And the first one that I got, I failed. And I was like, Brent, am I going to get fired? Like, what is the, you know, it's a big deal. And he's like, nah, man, look. And he gives me the same, essentially what he just said now. You know what I mean? If you're not expecting that to come to your work email, you should probably just ignore it. You know what I mean? Or at least ask a question, you know, to ask somebody before clicking on it. And I feel like that has saved me more often than not just at work, but in my personal life. You know what I mean? If I'm not expecting this, that's going right into the garbage can. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, if somebody needs to get a hold of me, they'll get a hold of me. But if I'm not expecting you, you look a little sus, I'm going to kick you right to the curb. So I feel like, hey, we're not beating a dead horse here. I mean, we kind of are, but we're giving you lots of different avenues to kind of just make it your own here. This is great advice. Sean, round us out with some takeaways.
Yeah, man. So I would, again, reiterating what they're and piggybacking off of what they're saying, I agree 100%. All of those things are incredibly important. One thing I would say, I'm a big proponent of the people being the front line and making sure that they have as many avenues as possible to know what's internal, external, what's, you know, to help meet those expectations. An additional thing on the email portion is setting internal, external headers on your subject line, as in when an email comes in from an external domain or an external email from your company email, have a designator there that goes, this is external. Maybe you should think about this. Like, and that helps, again, like Chris was saying, train them without training them. So now they go, ooh, this has external in the subject line. I should question this. Am I expecting this? Instead of it just coming in.
Yeah, there's an identifier immediately.
Like, they shouldn't be getting personal Amazon emails to their work email. You know what I mean? Yeah, that would be mine. And again, reiterating everything they've said as well.
Well, I mean, this is what a productive episode here at Digital Ascent. I mean, this has just been a fantastic, for me, non-sarcastically. I mean, I've learned a lot, and I hope that is a shared sentiment with our listener across the board. I'm going to speak for everybody and just throw it out there. Hey, we appreciate you guys. If you're making it this far into the episode, we appreciate you sticking around, giving us some love and lending us your ear. All right. And I also want to just take a quick second to give a quick shout out, give some love to Mr. Quiz Wedgewolf. Quiz Wedgewolf for Mr. Wedgeworth for joining us on this episode, man. It's been awesome. Thanks for sharing some knowledge with us, dude. And really, just on my piece, thanks for letting me know what you do.
Finally, after all these years,
I appreciate you guys
after all these years, man.
I like to keep it light. A lot of times I don't really go into a lot of extensive detail with what I do. So it was cool to get to really talk about the things that I just kind of talk to myself about every day. So no, I thank you guys. I appreciate it.
I just want to, hey, look, I hope, Chris, that like this is something that like you're proud of and you share in your group. And I just want to let everybody know it's not that like I am a terrible person at work, but Chris is like the man in the chair. You know what I mean? Like Chris is working. Like we don't see Chris because Chris is out here chasing vulnerabilities and remediating, you know, all these things that need to be patched. All right. Like we just don't see him because he's working so damn hard. So like it's not that I'm terrible. Hey, Chris just be out here doing his thing. You know what I mean? That's so, right. Hey, just give us some love to Mr. Wedgeworth here. Hey, as always, we're going to redirect you guys to our Discord. We're going to drop, we'll have plenty of source material in the show notes, as always, loaded with source material, like I just said. So be sure to check those out if you're interested, and give us a shout at Discord. We'd love to hear some feedback. What are some things that you do with vulnerability management? Do the things that you guys are looking into differ from, Chris's perspective or any of our big brain guys here? Let us know. We'd love to hear it. Thanks for giving us a listen, and we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Later.
See ya.
Bye.